The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Racing Forum webinar, handicapping session, where we're going to be handicapping Woodbine Mile Day. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you alongside the stalwart of these webinars, the Director of Product Marketing at DRF, Mike Hogan, and also our very special guest, legendary handicapper and author, Steve Davidowitz, whose new book is called Cashing Big on Racing's Biggest Days. How are you today, gentlemen?
I'm fine.
Doing well. I'm excited for this this discussion. There's a lot of good races, and I'm excited to get Steve's take on them.
Absolutely. Steve, the new book, as we mentioned, Cashing Big on Racing's Biggest Days. I think this day qualifies with 4 stakes races, and I know that Woodbine Racetrack in general played a big role in the writing of your new book. Was just curious to get a sense of how excited you are in anticipation of this day and where you think Woodbine and its big days sort of fit into the pantheon of racing in the year 2016.
I think this is an excellent day, and it certainly qualifies as a day that fits the title of the book, Cashing Big on Racing's Biggest Days. And as you hinted, I got the genesis or the original idea for the book way back when Woodbine hosted the Breeders' Cup in 1996. I didn't think about writing the book then, but it was a big day that I enjoyed a fair amount of success, you might say, and I illustrated the 2 big races that caught my attention on that Breeders' Cup day as one of the very first chapters in Cashing Big. And I'm very interested in tomorrow's card. It's a very strong card.
Excellent. Well, the book is great. Not only your insights, but insights from other top handicappers as well. You can find a copy of that book at the DRF store. And if you're really fortunate and have a chance to see Steve in person, I bet he'd be so kind as to sign it for you at an upcoming appearance at a racetrack near you. There's really some great material in there. I also meant to mention up top that our webinar today is sponsored by Woodbine. And the first race that we're going to talk about, guys, actually, do you want to go through the stakes first, or do we want to stick to the way it's written on our sheet here and go right to the late pick 4?
I'll defer to Steve, but we were talking before, and Steve's actually looked at all 4 stakes as well as the late pick 4. So if we have time, let's cover it all.
We do, and as you see there on your screen, if you want to submit a question at any time, you can do so via the software in the that you're watching this webinar through. Submit a question. We'll get to as many as we can, either during the course of the conversation today, or we'll set aside a little bit of time at the end. If you don't get a chance to get your question answered, feel free to hit Mike or me up on Twitter. I'm at Looms Boldly. Mike is at DRF Formulator. And if you have a question that doesn't lend itself to 140 characters, feel free to send it along to podcast@drf.com. And if it's a question specifically for Steve, who's not a Twitter person, at least not yet, maybe we could even bring Steve on the podcast to answer some questions. So that could be a lot of fun as well. But without further ado, let's dive into some handicapping. The first race we're going to talk about is the 4th race. It's the Ontario Derby. This is the start of the $150,000 guaranteed pick 4, the first of 4 stakes on this loaded Woodbine card. Steve, who did you come up with in here, or what are your general thoughts about approaching this race?
Well, truthfully, I really wasn't going to do much on this race, but a horse jumped off the page at me, so to speak, and I want to mention Berliner, the 7 horse in the Ontario Derby, the 4th race. And that's because of 2 things that are sometimes overlooked in handicapping, yet play a fairly strong role. When Arrogate won the race at Saratoga, he had these qualities, and they were very much overlooked, and certainly proved the value of them. And that is that Berliner has raced against and beaten older horses in his last, actually 3 starts, but his last 2 starts against winners. And Arrogate did the same thing in Santa Anita when he shipped out to run and win in the Midsummer Derby at Saratoga. And another thing that also seemed to be of value to me in terms of why this horse might be an interesting horse to key around in any pool you want to play, and that's as far as I can go on the race, is that he's a turf to synthetic track switcheroo. And the trainer, Nicholas Gonzalez, has a terrific record with that move. He's a 35% winner when he takes a horse off the turf and moves him to the synthetic track. And I think that's outstanding. So this horse caught my eye in a couple of directions and might be, you know, a serious horse to use to bet against the favorite Amos Gizmo.
Those are some very good points, Steve. Mike is showing in Formulator how you can use the trainer tool to dig even a little bit deeper. You can see there, we'll go back to the basic look of the PP when Mike's done with the Formulator search, and you can see the number in black and white right there in your PP, the turf to synthetic number that Steve quoted. If you're looking for more information, you can dive deep with Formulator and look not only at a larger sample of Nick Gonzalez runners, but also look at the PPs of each of those individual horses. As to the first point that Steve made, that's another one you can easily see right there in the running lines of the DRFPP. Mike, I don't know if you want to maybe hover the cursor over where it has the 3 and the arrow right before the class of the previous race in the past performances. We need like a cool telestrator tool or something. It's probably available in there. I just don't know how to use it.
I think I can use a highlighting tool.
It is? That's cool.
Yeah.
So you can see that exact angle that Steve was looking for. Before we move on from this race, Steve, do you suppose that it's really just a subtle class angle, the idea that these horses who've faced elders do better dropped in to restricted company? Is it as simple as that?
Well, I just think that it's, if you think about it, it's much harder for 3-year-olds usually to defeat older horses, especially during the summer. Maybe later in the fall when they're getting close to their own 4-year-old year, you'll see it more often. But when it happens in July or in August, I think it is a powerful indicator that the horse is better than maybe he is showing even. And if that race that he had run those days when he was meeting older horses were against 3-year-olds, he probably would have won by bigger margins. And so I do take it as, if you want to clarify it or call it a class angle, call it what you like. But the fact is that 3-year-olds have a harder time beating older horses during the summer, and when they do, you should take special note of it.
I think it's a great point. It's something I've definitely noticed over the years without being able to fully quantify, but it just does seem like an indication of talent and something to always be on the lookout for, easily identified in your DRFPPs. I think we should move it on to the 8th race, if you guys agree. This is the start of the $100,000 guaranteed pick 5, connecting the last 5 races on the card. There's a 20-cent minimum here, which allows for some interesting opportunities. Maybe, Steve, before we dive into the specifics of the race, I'll ask you a general question. As a horse player, what do you think of having a low minimum, a minimum as low as 20 cents? Is it something that that you use as another tool in your arsenal, or does the minimum increment of the bet not really matter to you one way or the other?
Well, to me personally, it rarely does matter, because I will take multiples of the base unit 20 and bring it up to a $1 unit or a $2 unit or even more if I really like a sequence. But it certainly gives players who aren't really into the game as much, or with the serious play, an opportunity to play various wagers that they wouldn't get a chance to. So I'm in favor of at least doing these types of low unit wagers as experimental experimental periods, to see exactly what the handle is with respect to that, and to teach people how to use the low minimum in terms of making multiple plays on the in a sequence that they might not ordinarily have a shot at with a larger base unit. So I'm in favor of it, but I also want to monitor it, and I also want to see the results of that as it impacts the handle. And I would like to see more education at the track itself every time they run a day like this, to give players an opportunity to really take advantage of it if that's possible. I'd also like to make one more comment, and
Sure.
I think that because we have these great stakes races today, I do wish to to suggest to Woodbine that they perhaps could use them, even the 4th race, lumped together as an all-stakes pick 4 the next time they have a day like this. I think it's great advertising if they have the opportunity, and I think the fans will respond to it a lot.
Mike Hogan was actually making a similar point earlier today, Steve, on the DRF Players podcast. While we certainly understand the rationale of trying to get some bigger fields spread throughout these sequences, I believe as a horse player, especially as the sport goes more and more into this direction of having big days and having these almost mini Breeders' Cup races, it might be a nice opportunity in the future to see the 4 races in a sequence that we could bet all together. That's just our opinion. I'm sure they're going to be looking at it very closely. Got to give Woodbine a lot of credit if you believe in doing creative things with wagering, going with these lower minimums like you were saying before that, Steve. And not only can you play the pick 5 in a 20-cent increment here, but also trifectas, or should I say triactors and superfectas and pick 3s. You get to experiment with that lower minimum. You mentioned about tools for educating players to construct better tickets with these low minimums. Mike, I have a feeling you have a pretty good suggestion for one tool available from DRF that can help people when constructing their multi-race bets.
Absolutely. If you haven't used DRF Ticketmaker, by all means do so, especially for a bet like a pick 4 or a pick 5, and especially a 20-cent bet like Steve was saying. What you want to do is you want to press those stronger opinions more. So you do a 20-cent pick 4 for covering your base bet, and then the ones that you like more you play for $1 or $2 in certain sequences. If they come in, you'll have for that higher number, and others, especially longer priced, less likely winners, you may cover just for the base minimum. It's drfticketmaker.com. It's absolutely the way to go when you're playing these types of bets. One other thing I wanted to mention too before we dive into the 8th race, if you buy any past performance for Saturday, if you buy Belmont for Saturday, if you buy Gulfstream Park for Saturday, any other Saturday DRF past performances, either Classic or Formulator, will give you Woodbine Saturday's card for free. And the way you see it is in Formulator at the top of your screen here, you'll see 2 drop-downs. You also get Los Alamitos for free on Saturday. In Classic, you'll see it underneath the link to access whatever card you've purchased. But it's a rare 3-for-1 opportunity. If you're thinking about playing any track at all, you'll get 3 for the price of 1 tomorrow.
An excellent point. All right, Steve, let's get down to this race here. It goes as the 8th. It's the Canadian Grade 2, and we are fillies and mares going 1 1/8 on the turf here at Woodbine. What did you come up with to start this guaranteed pick 5?
Well, first I do want to say something about Woodbine again. I love Woodbine, and I enjoyed my seminar visits that I had there, and I hope I can get back there next year. I really would love to do that. At the same time, for this particular race, and this is a great card, it really is, I came up with 2 horses to use in any multi-sequence wager that could be the pick 4, the pick 5, or any sequence wager, and that was the number 2 horse, Dacita, and the number 4 horse, Strut the Course. And I like Dacita for her victory in a Grade 1 race at Saratoga and overall good form, and the fact that trainer Chad Brown not only won the trainer's title at Saratoga, but almost everything he sent on the grass was live. You could hardly make any ticket at Saratoga on a turf race, in any turf race, without using him. And this particular mare has excellent overall form, and I think her workout line looks good as well, and I expect her to be very hard to beat. The horse that I think has the best chance to defeat her is Strut the Course. And Strut the Course has a stretch threat kind of profile, excellent series of workouts. Since her last race in July, she's had a steady diet of fast 5-furlong workouts all the way through September the 10th. She's in good hands. Both the trainer has an excellent record, and the jockey is doing well at Woodbine. And I think she's the most likely upset horse in the race, even though Rana de Patera is another Chad Brown in the field, and it's hard to go past him at any time, even when you select one of his stablemates. but I do think that the 2 and the 4 are the 2 best horses in that field.
You have the same top 2, Steve, as Ron Gierking, who does such a good job covering Woodbine for Daily Racing Form. He covers the scene as a journalist. He also does handicapping. Folks interested in playing Woodbine more often would do very well to start reading his stuff in the paper and on the website on a regular basis. Very respected by both horsemen and handicappers up here, and a great way in. And the fact that you two have the same top 2 in this race certainly didn't escape my notice. Mike Hogan, I had a question for you. I was curious about how Chad Brown, Steve noted the success he has at Saratoga. Just want to show folks another way they can use Formulator to take a look at all the Chad Brown runners on the Woodbine turf in the last bunch of years. You can see, I'll let you talk through, Mike, what information we're seeing here.
Yeah, if you use Formulator, you just click on the trainer's name, in this case Chad Brown. It brings up, as Pete said, all the runners he's had everywhere in North America in the last 5 years. I clicked on the track jockey owner tab. I used today's track. And Pete, you mentioned just turf at Woodbine, so you can do surface as turf. He's actually 0 for 15. So that's the bad news. The good news is 9 of the 15 hit the board. So it's not like they're running poorly. It's just he's maybe had a little bit of bad luck at Woodbine in the last 5 years. Of course, all of those with only one was a listed stakes. The rest were all graded stakes. So, you know, he's only sending horses in for big races.
I think that probably speaks to the depth of competition, and I think your point about luck, Mike, is correct. As you'll see there, you can see the margins, and he's not far from having some success. I will ask you though, Steve, a small sample like that, does that give you any pause at all in betting Chad Brown at a place like Woodbine, or do you think this is just more noise than it is signal at this stage with this low sample?
Well, I think it's a valuable stat to keep in mind, and it should lead you to look elsewhere in the race for horses that you think are at least an equal upsetter or a live contender. That's why I didn't put him solo or her, Dasita solo. That's why I did look into the rest of the field and found Strut the Course as a very live contender who has excellent experience over the Woodbine track. And that's another reason why I didn't really get crazy about Rana de Batera, the other Brown trainee in the race. But I do think overall, what I like to see in races like this, I know the competency of the trainer. I know that he's having the best year of his life right now that probably outperforms any prior year when he had horses shipping in. And I like the form of this horse, so I have to say I think this is the horse to beat, Dasita, but I will use the 4 horse at equal strength.
I think that's an important note. What do you got, Mike?
I was going to say, when we were on the DRF Players podcast this morning with Ron Gierking, he mentioned that there's rain in the forecast, and there's a chance that it could be less than firm turf. And what I'm doing now is I'm showing the form of all of the runners where I've grayed back all the firm turf and just focusing on the races on good or less. Dasita, she's only run once on less than firm turf in North America, and that was her seemingly non-effort at a relatively short price in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. Prior to that race, she was scratched out of a prep because it came up too wet for Chad Brown's liking. That's another thing that gives me pause with her. If the rain does come and she does indeed run, it might not be the surface she likes, but you'll note that Strut the Course, who's the other horse that you like in here, Steve, she's actually run quite well on good or yielding turf, especially at Woodbine. So might be one to upgrade if it does come wet.
And I have been warned that this is a bit of a microclimate situation up here where weather patterns can shift greatly, or it can be raining in one place in Toronto and fine in another. So definitely continue to watch the weather carefully. I'm sure by following horse racing Twitter, you'll be able to get a pretty good sense. And when the broadcast begins tomorrow, I wouldn't go ahead and make straight up assumptions about the turf course being off, but it is something to keep in mind as we look at the remainder of the races for Saturday. Steve, let's move on to the 9th race, not one of the stakes on the card, but it is the start of the $250,000 guaranteed pick 4. Did you have a thought in here for folks looking to get started in that pick 4, or just to stay alive in the pick 5 that begins with the previous race?
I do, but I want to make a comment about the off-course possibility for the 8th race.
Sure.
If it gets really soft, the horse that I would give an upgrade to in the field is the European Shipper. The European Shipper, Steve Davidowitz, has run several times on soft and otherwise wet turf courses and has faced some pretty decent company in Europe. Now, it's very difficult to make a measurement that says where she really fits in this group, so to speak. But if I were upgrading anybody relative to the wet conditions, if they really turn out to be wet, that would be the filly that I would use in addition to the horses I mentioned. And I might make the 4-horse slightly better than the 2-horse in my 2-horse appraisal. Going to the 9th race.
A lot of sense. Yeah.
All right, going to the 9th race now. This is a totally wide open race where you could do a lot of different things or nothing at all. And yet, if you want to play the sequence that starts in the 8th race all the way to the 12th, you have to find a few horses or a horse or two that you would lean on. And even if you weren't going to do that, I have a horse in here that didn't quite jump off the page at me, but definitely caught my attention, and he's going to be a big price. And that's the 4-horse, Foxley. And I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the horse's name correctly. There are too many apostrophes in the way that they spell it. But here's a horse who hasn't run since October 2015. He's in a terrific barn, Mark Case, and he's had a tremendous meeting up at Woodbine. And here's a horse who's worked steadily and often, and he's coming back for his debut as a 3-year-old pretty late in the season. And because he ran what we can call is a rather ratty-looking debut, he's got to be overlooked in the betting. Yet this is a trainer who knows what he's doing, who has terrific success second time out and off workout patterns like the one we're looking at. And I'd make a small win-place bet on this horse no matter what else I do in this race. And as for any other horse in the field to use with respect to the pick 4-5 sequences, I would think that the 8-horse, Sir Bronx, deserves. He's been beaten as heavy favorites his last 2 times, but he ran creditably for this level, and I certainly think that he's still the one to beat based on overall form in the field.
Sir Bronx definitely seems to have a little bit of a late kick in some of the races, that ability to finish that might serve him well in here. He's one of the ones we talked about this morning, and that's a great point, Steve, that you make about Mark Cassie, obviously one of the top trainers up here for a number of years, and he could be, who knows, shaping up to have a really big day on Saturday, maybe a little bit of beer money coming in the form of number 4. I don't know if it's Foxley or Foxsole. I'm with you. Too many diacritical marks. Just send the pronunciation part of the brain into a tizzy. But with that said, let's move back to the graded stakes portion of the card. The 10th race is the Grade 1 Northern Dancer, going 1.5 miles. It's an interesting race with a lot of familiar names in here. And Steve, do you think this is a race where we can get narrow, or a race where we might have to spread around a little bit in this 8-horse field?
I think this is a spread around race if there is one on the card. I marked down 5 different horses out of the field, and the field contains 8 rather. And you know, when you go to 5 horses in a field, invariably how many times do the horses you leave out, even when you put 5 horses on a ticket, actually perform? It's very difficult to eliminate horses in this race. I ranked them in the following order, but narrowly one over the other. And here we have Chad Brown again, despite his 0 for 15 statistics of the past several years. He's shipping in live horses here. And as I said, he's been in terrific form as a trainer. And he brings jockey Joel Rosario with him. And Joel rode this horse twice back in 2014. And was a good second in tough company in both instances. has a very nice workout pattern. I think that horse is live. I don't think you can throw out the other Chad Brown in the field. And, you know, I have to confess to the fact that when a man does what he did at Saratoga, which was beyond anything any trainer in the history of Saratoga has ever done, and everything he threw out there on the grass seemed to be live, and they won a fair number of races. It made me think towards the last week or so of that Saratoga meeting that I definitely had to use she put in there in any multi-sequence race. And I would do the same here. But Marcassi has a live horse in here. World Approval is certainly a contender. I think the Pizza Man, who won the Arlington Million last year and has been rounding into form. He had a rough trip in his last race in the Arlington Million, but was beaten very, very marginally for a sixth-place finisher who had his share of trouble. So you can't throw him out. And I think even the 8-horse Dynaformer has perfect credentials to be a factor in this field. And I can hardly throw out, as I said, all of the horses that I even left out. But if I'm going in a multi-sequence race, I'm going to use 5 horses in this one. I'm going to use the 2, 4, 6, 7, 8.
So I'm going to jump in here with a question that we have from Paul M. And it's a seemingly a great time to ask it. We're looking at this pretty wide open turf race. He wants to know what specific handicapping angles do you use specifically for turf races, Steve? Is it speed, class, final fractions, some combination thereof, speed figures? How do you approach a race like this?
Well, I use all of those things, but I tend to prefer to see the horse in video replays that I can access the acceleration punch that they demonstrate. Maybe they were laying in the back of a group of horses and they moved out for some room and fired a big rally and didn't even win, but they passed 4 horses in the lane. I love acceleration power in turf races. Now, if you get races where there's lone speed, and no matter what acceleration power a horse has, he's going to have a real difficult time catching and beating the lone speed if it's a horse that fits in the company line. But, you know, you can't just discount any major factor in analyzing any race at any distance. But when you're dealing with longer distance turf races, I still like to see a horse who shows me terrific punch. And the fact is that you know, Big Blue Kitten has that type of punch. Has come from so far back on occasion. It was amazing that he got in the hunt at all. And I looked at the other horses that I mentioned, and I favored those horses for the various elements that they brought to the race. World Approval has more speed than any of the other horses in the field and could get lucky. But at the same time, I thought that 2-horse, as I say, Big Blue Kitten, and Wake Forest in particular have shown more punch on occasions that I've seen them, like Wake Forest's race in the Man of War back in May was a powerful late flying move. And, you know, that was at 1 mile and 3/8. And, you know, to see a horse show that kind of late punch is something you remember when they get into a race that looks like they fit really well.
Steve, when you're looking for that late punch in the PPs, I know there's a couple of different ways of doing it. Mike on the screen right now is showing how you can use the charts feature in Formulator to look at the specific times each horse runs for each sectional, and you can certainly gauge finishing punch that way. But you can also do it, I think, as you're suggesting, through the running lines. What for you is more important in trying to identify a turf horse's finishing kick? Are you looking at the specifics of the fractions they're running late in the race, or are you content just sort of seeing the move in the running line of the PPs?
Well, there's a couple of ways that I go about it. One is I tried to go back and look at the race replays that I have stored on major races where they may be coming out of, and like I say, if they make a strong visual impression, I'll remember that, and I'll see races where they fit the type of race that would be most effective. But if just looking at the running lines, if you look at Big Blue Kitten, for instance, if you look at his win in the Turf Classic Invitational last fall, he was 19 lengths back in the next call, a little bit more than 3/8 of a mile later in the running line. He's second by 1. Now, can you visualize that, being 19 lengths behind and then being only a length behind? in the next call, that's a sign of acceleration that was used in that race, and yet it didn't peak him out. He was able to hold and win, even though he lost some ground late because of the great move he made in that middle of the road race, middle of the running line. And you can see other running line clues like that. Sometimes you see it very, very late, and it doesn't show up quite like that. But in reality, those types of clues in the running line can help. But if you have the opportunity and you really want to get serious in this game, you should save some of the videos that are on TV for the major races so that you can go back and look for yourself.
That's a great point, Steve. And of course, if you're a formulator user, you don't even have to go to that extra degree of work because, as you'll see in the I don't know if you want to highlight it, Michael, you're showing it right there. If you click the link on the far right, the sort of blue hyperlink, you can play the video right there on your computer and watch not just the big ones. Big races also, typically, you're going to have a much easier time finding on YouTube. You'll see the video playing. It plays choppy through the webinar software, but generally in real life, it's a lot more smooth than that. And that's a great point also you made, Steve, about Big Blue Kitten shows those moves. I think obviously those were exaggerated maybe a little bit by the fact that he had his rabbit, Shining Copper, running in those races to really set it up and bring into relief the kinds of moves he was making in the middle of those races. But the point remains the same. If you can identify that in the running lines, it's going to put you ahead of the game looking for horses to distribute their energy late in the race and maybe be the kinds you're going to look for to win Grade 1 turf events or any turf events for that matter. Let's move on to the 11th at Woodbine. It's a first-level allowance race going 1 mile and a 16th. We're back on the synthetic. What are your general thoughts to keeping the parlays going in this 10-horse field, Steve?
Well, this was a difficult contest, I thought, but I settled on 3 horses in a ticket that I'd make up, and those were the 5, the 9, and the 10. I'll go through each one of them a little bit. Now, this is a race at 1 mile and a 16th on the synthetic track. So unless I have a trainer like we had in earlier races, a real outstanding pro taking horses off the grass and moving them onto the synthetic track, I tend to, take a lighter look at them. A borderline case in this instance would be Milwaukee Mist, who is Roger Atfield's horse, and he's got a decent percentage for sure taking horses off the turf and moving them onto the synthetic. And this horse has won on the synthetic, but he clearly prefers turf by everything that I have seen in him. So I was looking for something a little stronger that was better on the synthetic than on grass, and I came up to 5, a long shot, Chief Rollin' Thunder. Now this is a horse who's been running in $37,000 claiming races, which is not that different from a speed figure standpoint from the numbers that the horses achieve in the lower grade allowance level like this one. He ran an 83 buyer last time out, winning or pretty much under control the whole way around on the turf. But his prior race was a solid second at the same level with a 78 buyer on the synthetic. And he's won on the synthetic, and he's won more than once on the synthetic. And so I kind of lean to, well, this horse is being underrated at 15-1. I'd definitely like to use him. And then I went to the 9 horse, and the 9 horse is definitely a very solid synthetic turf horse who's also runs strongly at the 37,500 level and also in allowance races at a similar level almost as this, and has a very good record at the distance and on the synthetic. He's got probably among the best records in the whole race. And he's, he's a favorite. He's going to be one of the favorites. He was the favorite winning last time out, 17th. And his trainer is also having a very strong meet. And there's nothing wrong with the combination that Bridgman fits with Allard, the trainer. And the 10 horse also has very good form overall on the synthetic track and at the distance. So those are the horses that I think I will use for the continuation of any sequential wager, the 5, 9, and 10.
Mike, I have a formulator question for you to look at in real time here. You have one you want to do first, though?
No, you go. You go.
Well, one of the trainers who's been doing really well up at Woodbine this meet, and generally speaking as of late, particularly off the claim, is Norman McKnight, who has the number 7 Zonka in here. I thought it was interesting for him to claim a horse who was dropped in for a tag for the first time, and then to add blinkers. One of the ways that I love to use Formulator is to take a look at a larger sample of runners for a trainer like McKnight, and then to also look specifically at how his first claims with blinkers do. If there are enough of them to present a sample that we can draw any sort of conclusion from, I thought it might be fun to show folks how you can use Formulator to do that.
I'm glad you asked, because that's the horse I was going to talk about. We had a question from viewer John Flummock. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, John, who wanted to know particularly about that, the blinkers change, as well as he was noting that work since the claim, presumably with those blinkers on, is remarkably fast, 46 flat. So yeah, let's take a look. Let's click on Norm McKnight. And what I like to do when I go into Formulator is layer my filters. So the first thing we see, and we can see it's grayed back, Norm McKnight, you mentioned Petey's doing really well at the meet, doing really well up there in general, 23% win rate, 221 ROI with all of his runners in the last 5 years. So if you bet every one of them to win, you'd be making out with a nice little profit. But first off the claim, so we do first after claimed by Norm McKnight. You see it's steady 22%, 218 ROI, very similar to what he does with all runners. So then I'll add in first off the claim, switch to on with blinkers. He's 0 for 4, but 2 ran second, 1 ran second at 14 to 1, but then he had 1 run 8th at odds of 3 to 5. So I guess maybe a little bit of mixed signals on that one. And perhaps the workout is maybe what tips you on the other side of it at 6 to 1. He's one I might want to include just primarily because it's a trainer that seems to do very well off the claim.
Did you have any thoughts about that runner, Steve?
Yeah, I'd like to. I looked at every horse in this race as carefully as I could, and when I looked at him, I kept seeing Divine Sonnet, who beat him last time out. And while the blinkers is an interesting, fact, it hasn't been the key to a large percentage of McKnight's victories. So I wasn't that impressed. But, you give room for error there. And the workout says, yes, maybe he is going to improve for the trainer with the blinkers. And it'll be interesting to see. At the same time, Divine Sonnet, who just beat him, ran a courageous race last 2 times out, when he won and when he was second. And so there's a lot of grit there. And there's proven success on the synthetic. And the truth is also that Zonka hasn't won this year. And, is hoping the trainer may have made a good claim, but we're going to find out more about that today. And as far as workouts are concerned, there's nothing wrong with a 59 breezing of the synthetic track that Divine Sonnet showed us in his work for this race. So you can have a 46 on one hand, or you can have a 59 on the other, and you have a horse who already beat him. I'll take the 9 horse who already beat him.
Yeah, no,
all right, one more counterpoint for you on Zonka, Steve, and then we'll move on. He's claimed from a trainer who's 1 for 32 on the year, 3% win rate, and going to a trainer who's won 31% on the year. So, at twice the price.
That angle. I like that angle better than anything that was said prior about Zonka, right there.
Interesting.
There you go.
Thought that he could be more live than I first indicated. But if I had to go between the 7 and the 9, I frankly would still go to the 9, but I'd be watching out for that 7.
Fair enough.
I have a question for you about ticket construction before we get on to the 12th and final race, the Woodbine Mile. Steve, when you have, we'll go back actually to look at the 10th race for a second. I should have asked here. You mentioned how hard you had making eliminations in a race like that. Are you, in that situation, if you're going to be spreading in a leg, Are you more inclined to just use the horses equally and hope that the fact it looks like an open race means a long shot is more likely to win, or would you rank and press your contenders accordingly, maybe playing more combinations on the lower prices to try to keep equity going in the pick, or just pick the ones at the top of your pyramid, like for you, Big Blue Kitten and Wake Forest, and press them a little bit more? How do you approach weighting your bets, if at all, when you like 5 horses in an 8-horse race?
Well, I would tend to favor the horses I have slight edges in my mind about in the construction of those tickets, as opposed to merely price. If I have a horse who's 10-1 or 15-1, or even 5-1 versus a 2-1 favorite, I would accent if I think the 6-1, 5-1, 10-1 have as good a chance to win the race or better, they're going to get the majority of the play that I make, even at the lower units of wager. I will use the other horses for savers with respect to the lower units of wager, but I'm trying to make money. I'm trying to capitalize on my opinion. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if I'm right, I want to make the best value cash. I want to go to the window and get the most money for the effort I've put in. I'm not going to overgrade horses on price, but if I like a horse equal with lower price horses, or if I like them a little better than lower price horses, I am going to weight my tickets in favor of those horses that I slightly prefer, even if there's a heavy favorite in the race.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And what you're saying about getting paid when you're right reminds me of our friend and podcast co-host Jonathan Kinchin, who's also one of the players featured in the book, Cashing Big on Racing's Biggest Days, when he says he wants to crush their souls, talking about how he'll play certain combinations to just catch his preferred horses at any price to make sure he really gets paid when the going is right. It sounds like you're sympathetic to that idea, Steve, if not actually crushing a soul, just to make sure that one can get paid when one is right.
I agree with the philosophy with a slight asterisk. I don't want to be overly enthusiastic on a price basis at the expense of making myself more vulnerable than I should be for the money I'm totally investing. But I'll weight the tickets in favor of the horses I have a slight edge to in my mind, or equal and are better priced. But I certainly won't eliminate or just take those horses solo and run the ticket through those horses and say, I'm here to cash big and bye-bye, see ya. No, you can't be belligerent in this game. You've got to be fair-minded.
I like it. All right, let's take a look at the Woodbine Mile. Obviously, it's a grade one. It's the reason I'm up here in Toronto this weekend, to get another chance to clap eyes on the queen of the turf, Tepin, who blew my mind with her performance at Keeneland, which I got to watch live. That was the contest day down there. Just a visually arresting effort. And then, of course, came back at Royal Ascot to really show the world just how good she was. Steve, what are you doing with Tepin in the Woodbine Mile?
Well, you have to have a lot of respect for her. I mean, she's only won a bunch of races in a row, defeated all-comers at different tracks, dating back to last year, even before the Breeders' Cup Mile that she beat males in that day. And, it's hard to go against her. I mean, she's 1-2 in the morning line and probably will go to the post in the win pool at lower odds. But this is not an empty field. I mean, you're putting up $1 million here, and, there are horses in here that have some ability. I'll use Tepin, of course, as the major horse that I will use many multiple times in the sequence that I'll use for the pick 5 and or the pick 4. But I'm going to throw in another horse on a lower level ticket to have some backup presence in the field, who has some intriguing possibilities. And to me, that's Mustak Hayet. And the reason being, this is a horse who's run in international races on all kinds of turf courses, and has also set up a pretty decent record, mostly seconds. But the times that she was second, he was second, it was against top-notch competition in most cases, or there was something that happened during the running of the race that could give a little bit of an excuse. At the mile distance, 2 wins and 1 second out of 3 total starts. And again, off-course conditions, if that should happen, that puts Mutakayev in this ball game. And I will use a backup ticket using the 2-horse in that regard. As far as Tepin is concerned, no course condition seems to hurt her at all. She's run on firm, she's run on good, she's run on soft, and she's won. And, you know, this is a mare that's going to go to the Hall of Fame. I mean, she's only won over $3.5 million and proven herself around the world. There's nothing to dislike here.
She's pretty unbelievable, and I do think the race sets up for her. But you make some great points about Mutakayev. I like to analyze European races and still have a lot of friends over there who pass along great info from time to time. One interesting piece of info from the Juddmonte International had to do with the early fractions in the race and the fact that they were pretty slow, and Mutakayev gets upgraded off of being able to make ground, being behind postponed. You can find that video on YouTube and see the trouble in the stretch. There's a lot of positives, and for me, Mutakayev will definitely be all over my tickets. I just, like you, Steve, feel like Tepin because, in my view, because of the way the race is going to shake out. I think she'll be able to stalk and pounce and get that trip she wants. I'm gonna try to stick with those two. One other point to make for handicappers looking to evaluate European horses. One interesting thing about Mutakayev that leaps out to me, you can see in the DRF PP there that the left-handed starts are easily identified. I don't know if you want to highlight that, Mike, and show. But I mean, this horse has done really well. Left-handed. York, in particular, is a left-handed galloping course. Similar to Woodbine, I would say, is the most galloping course in North American turf racing. And what I mean by galloping is allows horses to make sustained runs as opposed to the short bursts of speed that sometimes do better when you're looking at the two-turn turf races in the USA. Steve, I'll ask you, is there anything in particular you look for in a horse, whether we're talking about a European shipper or a domestic runner, when coming to this unusual configuration, this giant Woodbine turf course? Is there anything in particular that you think horses can do to tout themselves that they're going to succeed in this unusual configuration?
Well, I think the point that you made, that there was the left-handed accent for Mutakayev, is an interesting one and something that players should train themselves to look at. But it's a lot of guesswork, really. I mean, let's be honest. You're not going to be able to zero in on unless you recognize the names of horses who you know to be really top-notchers that are in the company lines of a particular European horse, unless you see that they have shown extreme acceleration in what the commentary is or in the video that you can see. You know, there's very little that you can really trust relative to, you know, some angle that you're going to, oh, this is going to work at Woodbine. You'll find out tomorrow whether it worked at Woodbine. But the overall company lines of this horse, the overall performances of this horse, strike me as being literally grade 1 caliber, and a good reason why they shipped in here for this $1 million race, Shadwell Stable. They know their horses all over the world.
I think that's a great point, and I'm excited to see what we're describing almost as a two-horse showdown here. Mike, I know you had kind of a clever idea in the mile for a horse to use to at least get a piece. You want to share that with us?
Well, yeah. I mean, my point about trying to beat Tepin was not to knock her. I mean, I think she's simply the best horse in the race. It's just a matter of whether this goal is the end goal in mind for her, and especially after the Ascot race. You know, I think they need to get one in her, maybe two before the Breeders' Cup. And, you know, she can run well here and still lose. This is a pretty decent field. The one I thought was interesting at a price was Full Mast, who has run well, if not fantastic, since coming to North America for Bill Mott, but certainly on the European form last year as a 3-year-old, beat Glen Eagles, albeit via DQ, in France, ran well in other group stakes overseas, certainly looked last year to be one of the top 3-year-olds in Europe, and if he's able to run a big race and step forward tomorrow, he could be one that makes noise at a price.
Want to mention, we have a few minutes left. If you want to submit questions, you're all right, Steve. If you want to submit questions, we still have a couple of minutes to get to them. Steve, did you have a point you wanted to make about Full Mast as well?
Well, Billy Mott is one of my favorite trainers of all time, and where Chad Brown has been hot this year and is good overall, Billy Mott has been literally a Hall of Fame trainer for the last 20 years. And everything he sends out, you have to take a close look at. This horse has buyer speed figures that register very well with almost every horse in the field except Tepin. One point about Tepin is that I believe this is not necessarily just a simple prep race kind of for this horse for the Breeders' Cup. This horse is trained steadily and fast for this race. If you go back to her last start in June and you look at her workout line coming into this race, there's real purpose there.
Yeah, they certainly have had other options. They talked about the Boston Spa. They talked about some other options. But when a barn like this points even for a month and circles it on the calendar at a track they know so much about, it's hard to build an enthusiastic case against her. But I do think Mike makes an interesting point about how she does thrive on her racing, and clearly there are other things. So it's hard to know, and we're going to find out. But I'm certainly not going to be sitting 4 of 4 in a pick 5 or 3 of 3 in a pick 4 and not having a whole lot of Tepin, no matter how much I do decide to include Mudakayef or maybe get a little froggy and jump in with a little piece on a clever horse like Mike's Full Mast. My only concern about Full Mast, the figures obviously speak for themselves. The visual effort, I thought, in the first race in this country made me think Full Mast could be a player for this exact race. I was a little concerned by the way the horse ran when tackling a mile on the Woodbine turf previously. Mike, does that give you any pause, or do you just figure that at the price you'll take your chances?
At the price, I'll take my chances. And look, I don't want to use the term bounce necessarily, but there's a chance that he regressed a little bit in just the second start in a year in the King George. Maybe it was, granted he was favored, but maybe it was a little bit too much too soon to bite off. He came back with a nice effort against Shining Copper, who we've mentioned earlier in the webinar. I remember that day. It seemed like maybe he had some sort of issue, didn't really want to go into the gate. Hopefully Bill Mott, like Steve says, he's a Hall of Fame trainer for a reason. Hopefully Bill Mott's got him figured out and wouldn't be putting him in this spot unless he thought he had a chance to run well.
Mike, do we have any other questions for Steve while we have him? I've got a couple things I could ask about the book, but I want to make sure we give our viewers a chance to have him as a resource if there's anything that's coming through the transom right there.
We do. We have a couple questions in particular relating to this race. One is John Koziak. I hope I'm pronouncing names correctly here. Apologize if I'm not. He wants to know the fact we have 3, and if you add Full Mast in here, who's run a few times, I guess you could say 4 Europeans in this race facing Tepin. Does that mean, in John notes non-elite Euros, does that note that Tepin is perhaps beatable in this race, or do you think they figure even if we run second to her, the purse is good enough that it's worth the trip?
Well, I think there's speculation on the part of the trainers and the owners involved because they want to find out if they're fillies or mares or colts as they're running any of these Europeans in any of these races that don't necessarily figure best. And here they got to face Tepin. And they are male horses that are facing Tepin, who is a mare. So they have a chance to see if they belong in the Breeders' Cup if they run solid race. they also will win over $200,000 for running second, which is pretty much a good winning purse in Europe in most races.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other note from viewer Paul M., who, going back to Mutakayef's running lines, notes that he ran third to Proposed last out, who is likely to, postponed, not proposed. That's a different horse. Postponed, who is likely to be one of the favorites for the Breeders' Cup Turf if he makes the trip. So something certainly to keep in mind there.
Oh yeah, definitely top company. You see Mondial East in the running lines there. We know how good Mondial East is. Of course, Tepin handled rather easily, but this is a top class horse, and this is a real test. And this is, I think you could say, fairly safely, more of a test, just in terms of not in terms of the overall challenge, but in terms of just the form of this specific horse than what she faced in the Queen Anne. So it's really shaping up to be a big showdown. Steve, let me ask you a general betting question. Where do you figure to handle most of your money on the Woodbine card tomorrow?
Well, I'm going to take a couple shots on the long shots that I mentioned earlier, and if I get seriously involved rather than just casually involved, it would be in the pick 5. I would use the horses that I mentioned in the 8th race to the 2 horses I mentioned in the 9th, to the 5 horses I mentioned in the 10th, to the 3 horses in the 11th, to a single 8 and a backup ticket at lower denomination to the 2. I could also play an exacta in the 8th race where I like the 2 and the 4 on top, but on the second level I would use the 2, 3, 4, 5. That's only 6 combinations, and you can play them at any strength you want. The 15-to-1 shot, the 4 horse in the 9th race is worth a win place bet regardless. That horse is coming back from a layoff in good hands. And I could play the trifecta in the 10th race also, using both the 2 and the 4 on top of the 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. So that would be 2, 4 over 2, 4, 6, 7, 8 over 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. That's 24 combos, and you're dealing with 20-cent units, so you can do whatever you want there. But that's basically how I'm approaching the card from a gambling standpoint.
That's terrific stuff. And for folks, obviously we're covering a lot of information in a short amount of time. If you want to go back and re-watch, re-listen to any piece of this broadcast today, you can find it. It'll be back up in, seems like it usually takes about an hour, drf.com/YouTube. You can get all the information, once again, that Steve has been kind enough to share with us. I feel like we got time for one more question. We should be wrapping up pretty soon. I just wanted to ask another question about the book, Steve, in terms of how it's been received generally, and what feedback are you receiving specifically about the most helpful part of the book that people are finding?
Well, it's a great question. I really appreciate the response the book has gotten so far. It's selling rather well, and at the same time, it's gotten extraordinarily positive reviews. And when you work so hard on something, like I did all last year, to write a book like this, that's very gratifying. As far as what I think the most valuable sections of the book are, there are 2 things that people could really concentrate on to improve their game. One are the individual question and answer series of questions and answers in the middle part of the book, where I ask Gary West, Dave Olento, Steve Christ, John Preachy, Jonathan Kinchin, Matt Carruthers, and Rob Henney, and myself, questions that will help any player understand the game better, I believe. And the other was, all of the examples in the latter section of the book are designed for every specific type of exotic wager that we have in America, and the type of strategies that I suggest for playing those individual types of exotic bets. I'm very proud of the book, and it's gotten great feedback, even through emails by people who have bought it.
We got to do that signing up in Saratoga, and it was great afterwards, Steve, seeing folks coming up and buying the book and talking about how much your work in general means to them. Steve, of course, the author of maybe the single greatest handicapping book I've ever read, Betting Thoroughbreds, which was updated just a few years ago and should be on every horse player's bookshelf as far as I'm concerned. I want to thank you, Steve, for taking the time out of your schedule to come join us today on the webinar and share your thoughts about Woodbine. I'm hoping that we'll be able to have you back either in a webinar or a podcast again soon.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to do it, and good luck everybody out there. Have a great day on a great card.
Absolutely. Going to thank Mike Hogan as well, and thank Woodbine, our sponsor, for the opportunity to put this webinar together. Everybody who tuned in, appreciate it very much. You make these shows go. Everybody who asked questions especially, we really appreciate it. You've been watching a webinar produced by DRF.com.